Pause for a moment before moving forward. There is a deeply rooted idea that few people dare to question because it seems morally untouchable. From an early age, we were taught that being good is synonymous with safety, that kindness protects, that generosity builds respect. But what if this belief, so often repeated and praised, is quietly putting you at risk without you even realizing it? Most people believe that the more kindness they offer, the more protected they will be, that the more they help, the more valued they will be, that the more they give of themselves, the more recognition they will receive. However, reality rarely works that way. The world does not respond to what you feel, but to what you demonstrate repeatedly. And repeated patterns shape the way you are treated. There is a discomfort that arises when we begin to realize that our best intentions do not always produce the best results. A silent unease that appears when we help, give in, understand, and yet are still overlooked, used, or forgotten. This discomfort is not ingratitude on your part. It is a sign that something important is not being said. For centuries, attentive thinkers have observed this phenomenon carefully. Among them Machiavelli, who saw a truth that is difficult to accept. Goodness, when practiced without strategy, can become a risk. Not because it is wrong, but because the world does not reward naive virtues. It responds to strength, clarity, and limits, even when it disguises this under moral discourse. This is not an invitation to abandon values, nor to act with cruelty. It is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about understanding that virtue without discernment loses power, that kindness without structure wears itself out, that helping without awareness can produce the opposite effect of what you intend. What you are about to hear is not comfortable, but it is liberating, because it reveals why so many good people end up tired, frustrated, and resentful. It reveals why, even when doing everything right, something always seems to go wrong. And it reveals how to transform kindness from a silent weakness into a conscious strength. Throughout this content, you will not find quick formulas or moralistic speeches. What you will find is clarity, a direct view of how kindness operates in the real world, far from idealizations. An understanding that allows you to act with greater intelligence, protect your energy, and choose when, how, and for whom your virtue will be offered. Because there is a profound difference between being good and being naive, between helping and sacrificing yourself, between virtue and vulnerability. And when this difference finally becomes visible, it reorganizes not only your actions, but the way you position yourself in relation to life, to people, and to the very power you carry. There is a silent moment when kindness stops protecting and begins to expose. This does not happen abruptly, nor in an obvious way. It happens gradually. You believe that being gentle creates safety, that generosity builds bonds, that patience generates respect. But the world does not interpret intentions, it interprets patterns. And when your pattern becomes constant availability, something changes. You stop being seen as generous and start being perceived as accessible, predictable, and easy to advance upon. Predictability is the invisible cost of excessive kindness. When you never say no, people stop asking whether they can cross your limits. They simply assume they can. Your kindness becomes routine. Your time becomes a public resource. You solve problems, absorb inconveniences, and are always available. Over time, this stops being admired and starts being expected. And when something is expected, respect begins to quietly disappear. This pattern appears everywhere once you learn to see it. The friend who only shows up when they need something. The colleague who receives help repeatedly but is never available when you need it. The family or group that decides that you will do it without even asking. This does not happen because people are necessarily bad. It happens because you taught them, without realizing it, that your limits do not exist. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology. He observed that those who never demonstrate limits are not treated as leaders, but as servants. Leadership requires the ability to deny access as much as the ability to grant it. When strength is absent from kindness, kindness loses authority. It ceases to be virtue and becomes a sign of vulnerability. And vulnerability without awareness attracts those who exploit, not those who respect. The most common mistake is believing that being good automatically generates protection. In reality, protection is born from clarity. When others know you will not react, they feel no guilt in advancing. When they know you will always adapt, they feel no obligation to reciprocate. Your silence becomes consent. Your patience becomes permission, and little by little, you stop being a respected presence and become merely a useful function in other people's lives. That is why excessive kindness often ends in resentment. Not because you regret helping, but because something inside you perceives the imbalance. A feeling of being used arises, even without knowing exactly when it began. The truth is uncomfortable. It began when kindness was offered without structure, without limits. Even the best intention collapses under the weight of the expectations created. Notice how rarely anyone thanks what they expect. Gratitude exists for what feels optional, not for what feels guaranteed. When your kindness becomes guaranteed, it loses emotional value. People stop seeing your effort and start seeing only your availability. And at the moment you hesitate, at the instant you take a stand, confusion arises. Why did you change? In their view, you broke an invisible agreement you never consciously accepted. Machiavelli was not warning against kindness itself. He was warning against kindness without strength. A leader who does not know how to say no is not merciful but ineffective. Strength gives weight to virtue. Without it, kindness turns into service without authority. Respect is not born from how much you give, but from the awareness that your giving is a choice, not an obligation others can claim. When this becomes clear, something important changes internally. You understand that limits do not make you cruel. They make your presence meaningful. They transform kindness from an open door into a conscious offering. The world does not fear gentleness, but it ignores gentleness that does not respect itself. And from this understanding, you begin to see how giving too much without discernment often destroys value instead of building it, because exposure is only the first layer of this process. The problem deepens when the act of giving ceases to be a choice and becomes a habit, when generosity loses its rarity and turns into something expected. It is at this subtle point, where abundance replaces discernment, that generosity begins to erode the respect it was meant to create. There is a point where generosity stops being seen as a virtue and starts being treated as an obligation. In the beginning, each gesture is received with gratitude, praise, and recognition. But little by little, something changes. What was once an exception becomes routine. What was perceived as care begins to be understood as duty. And when that happens, generosity loses its emotional impact. Human beings adapt quickly to what they receive. This adaptation is silent, but powerful. When someone receives help once, they feel gratitude. When they receive it twice, they feel relief. But when they receive it repeatedly, they begin to feel expectation. The mind turns the extraordinary into normal, and everything that becomes normal stops being valued, even though it continues to demand effort from the one who gives. That is why giving without discernment almost never builds loyalty. It builds dependency. The person no longer asks whether you can help, they simply assume you will. Your generosity becomes part of the background, as if it had always existed. And when something fails, when you cannot or do not want to give, the shock does not come from the absence of the gesture, but from the breaking of the expectation that was created. This pattern appears clearly in the closest relationships. Parents who give everything to their children believe they are demonstrating love, but often they create frustration and ingratitude. People who are helped repeatedly take offense at a single no, ignoring all the times you said yes. Human memory does not register constancy with affection, it registers interruptions as offense. Psychology explains this in a simple way. The brain values what is rare. What is abundant loses emotional weight. When your help is constant, it stops being perceived as a gift and begins to be seen as a right. And rights do not generate gratitude, they generate demands. Generosity, when it is not selective, teaches others not to value what they receive. Machiavelli understood this logic clearly. For him, benefits granted gradually retain their flavor. What is delivered without measure wears out quickly. Abundance, far from strengthening bonds, can erode respect. Not because people are ungrateful by nature, but because constant repetition alters the perception of value. Notice how behavior changes when you become less available. A simple step back draws attention. A boundary awakens awareness. Suddenly, what was previously ignored begins to be noticed. Absence reveals the weight of presence. This shows that the problem was never helping, but helping too much, too soon, and without discernment about who truly values what they receive. When you give without discernment, you create a silent imbalance. One side begins to receive without effort, the other begins to give without return. This imbalance does not remain neutral. It generates frustration, weariness, and often guilt in the one who gives. Generosity, which should expand, begins to drain, and what drains does not sustain healthy relationships. Being selective is not being cold, it is being conscious. When you choose whom to help, your help gains weight. It stops being automatic and becomes meaningful. People begin to respect what they know is not guaranteed. Strategic generosity does not diminish the impact of good. It amplifies it because it restores value to the gesture. But there is an even more delicate limit, where helping stops merely losing value and begins to cause real harm. A point where assistance not only creates dependency, but prevents growth. It is in this subtle territory where constant rescue replaces transformation that helping ceases to be a virtue and becomes a silent obstacle. There is an invisible limit where helping ceases to be an act of compassion and becomes a silent form of harm. This limit is not easy to perceive because it disguises itself as kindness, empathy, and good intentions. You believe you are extending a hand, but in practice, you are preventing the other from using their own legs. Not all suffering wants healing. Some want attention, others want comfort, and few want transformation. Helping someone who refuses to change creates a dangerous illusion. The illusion that you are saving them, when in truth you are postponing the inevitable. Growth requires friction. It requires responsibility. It requires inner confrontation. When you constantly remove that friction, you do not protect, you weaken. The immediate relief you offer steals from the other the opportunity to develop strength, clarity, and autonomy. There are people who deeply identify with their own suffering. They do not want to leave it because suffering has become identity. Pain turns into narrative, difficulty becomes excuse, and the role of victim offers something valuable, exemption from responsibility. Helping this type of person does not generate gratitude, it generates dependency. And the more you help, the more indispensable you become for them to remain exactly where they are. You recognize this pattern in the eternal victim. Everything goes wrong, always because of something external. The system, the past, other people, luck. There is never space for conscious choice. When you try to help, your solutions are ignored, but your attention is absorbed. The problem is never solved because it was never about solving. It was about keeping the cycle active. There is also the chaos addict. This person lives in a permanent state of crisis. When one situation calms down, another is created. Conflicts, ruptures, impulsive decisions. And there is always a request for rescue. You step in, organize, resolve, calm things down. For a while, everything improves, but soon the chaos returns because it is familiar. And by intervening, you become part of the pattern that keeps disorder alive. There is also the chronic rescue dependent, someone who has been helped countless times, received advice, resources, emotional support. Nothing changes. Not because they do not know what to do, but because they do not want to assume the cost of doing it. Your help turns into an emotional crutch. And the more you sustain them, the less the person develops internal strength to walk on their own. At this point, helping begins to be a form of subtle violence. Not only against you, but against the potential of the other. Because growth is born from friction with reality. When you soften every fall, you eliminate learning. When you solve every problem, you remove the need for maturation. Excessive comfort prevents transformation. The cocoon metaphor is inevitable because it reveals this truth clearly. The butterfly must struggle to emerge. The effort forces blood to circulate through the wings, making flight possible. When someone intervenes too early, the butterfly may come out, but it cannot fly. The same happens with people. Removing pain too soon removes the strength that would have been born from it. Often the impulse to help comes more from our discomfort with another's pain than from the other's real need. Seeing someone suffer unsettles us. We want to relieve, fix, resolve. But not all pain is a mistake. Some pain is instruction. When you interfere in this process, you take upon yourself a lesson that is not yours and prevent the other from crossing their own. There is a profound difference between abandonment and discernment. To abandon is to ignore someone who wants to grow. To discern is to know when to step back so growth can happen. Mature compassion does not try to save at any cost. It respects timing, limits, and individual responsibility. Helping without discernment is not love. It is fear of watching the other face their own shadow. The problem is that the world often confuses limits with coldness. When you stop rescuing, accusations arise. They say you have changed, that you have become distant, that you lost your heart. But in most cases, what truly changed was the access they had to you. And losing that access hurts more than facing their own stagnation. The truth is that no one awakens by being carried. Awakening happens when a person realizes there are no more crutches available, when the ground appears, when responsibility returns to its rightful place. Every time you save someone who does not want to change, you postpone this necessary encounter with their own reality. Helping the wrong people charges a silent price. You begin to feel drained, confused, guilty. Your energy diminishes, your clarity fades, and ironically, you become less capable of helping those who are truly ready to grow. Compassion without boundaries ends up becoming self-sabotage. The universe does not ask you to be a savior. It asks you to be an example, not to carry others, but to walk with enough integrity to inspire those who are ready. Your light does not exist to be drained by those who prefer darkness, but to guide those who have decided to see. When you understand this, guilt begins to dissolve. You realize that saying no can be the most loving act possible, that stepping away can be a form of respect, that allowing someone to face consequences is often the only real chance for transformation. True help does not weaken, it gives power back, and it is precisely at this point that all the pieces connect. The kindness that exposes, the generosity that loses value, and the help that harms reveal the same silent truth. Without strength, discernment, and limits, virtue becomes a risk. When this becomes clear, something deeper begins to emerge, an understanding capable of reorganizing not only your actions but the way you choose to live and position yourself in the world. As you reach this point, one thing should already be clear. Kindness, as it has been taught to most people, is not neutral. When practiced without discernment, it carries a silent cost. It exposes, exhausts, creates dependencies, and at times prevents the growth of both the one who helps and the one who is helped. The problem was never being good. The problem was always being good without awareness. You saw how kindness can turn someone into a target when it becomes predictable, how generosity loses value when it is offered without criteria, and how helping in certain contexts stops healing and begins to weaken. These are not moral failures, they are strategic failures. They are natural consequences of acting without limits in a world that responds to patterns, not intentions. Machiavelli was not teaching cruelty. He was warning about reality. Virtues only remain powerful when they walk alongside strength. Without it, they become tools for those who know how to exploit. Naive kindness lifts no one. It merely transfers power into the wrong hands, while draining those who believe they are doing the right thing. There is a decisive moment in which you must choose how you want to live, to continue being good in the old way, hoping the world will recognize something it was never programmed to reward, or to adopt a more conscious posture where kindness is offered with intention, limits, and clarity, where helping stops being an automatic reflex and becomes a strategic decision. This is not an invitation to harden the heart, but to strengthen it. A strong heart knows how to say no without guilt. It knows how to step away without hatred. It knows how to protect its energy without closing itself off from the world. It understands that not every pain should be interrupted and that not every outstretched hand should be accepted. When you stop trying to save everyone, something curious happens. You begin to help better. Your presence gains weight. Your choices gain impact. And those who truly want to grow draw closer, not to lean on you indefinitely, but to walk beside you. Kindness then stops being a risk and becomes a real force. In the end, the question is not whether you should be good or not. The question is whether you will be good with awareness, or continue being good at the cost of yourself. Because kindness without strategy weakens, but kindness allied with strength builds legacy, respect, and lasting impact. In a world full of people who know how to use, manipulate, and exploit, do not be the sheep that offers itself for sacrifice, believing that this is virtue. Be the one who protects, guides, and chooses with wisdom. When kindness is guided by clarity, it stops being a hidden cost and becomes the highest expression of conscious power.